Welcome to the Land to Lots podcast, powered by Launch Development Finance Advisors. And now your host, Carter Froelich.
Hello, everyone. This is Carter Froelich, and welcome to the Land to Lots podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be touching upon sustainable development. And the impetus for today's podcast is the result of Hurricane Ian and the devastation that it brought to the Fort Myers area of Florida. Shortly after the hurricane, I was watching a 60-minute episode on October the 16th. And as part of this episode, Bob Whitaker was interviewing the developer of Babcock Ranch, a gentleman by the name of Sid Kitson of Kitson and Partners. And he was comparing and contrasting the devastation that occurred at Fort Myers versus the basic pristine condition of Babcock Ranch. Now, Babcock Ranch is located inland from Fort Myers, but the thing that was very striking to me was that there was absolutely no damage to the buildings, to the homes at Babcock Ranch, other than maybe a few shingles that were blown off. So, as being a proponent of sustainable and thoughtful development, I wanted to reach out to my fellow Urban Land Institute friend and colleague, Tom Hoban, who is the president and chief investment officer of Kitson and Partners, and see if he would be willing to join us today to talk about Babcock Ranch, to talk about Kitson and Partners' view on sustainable development and the impact that is having on the industry and the home buying public. So with that, I'd like to welcome Tom Hoban. Tom, welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your day to be part of the podcast.
Carter, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. And, Tom, when maybe you could give the audience a little background on Babcock Ranch, the size of the ranch, and your vision for the development when you first acquired the property and were starting to plan your entitlements and your vision for Babcock Ranch.
Sure. And again, thank you, Carter, for the introduction, and thanks for having me on the podcast here today. Babcock Ranch is a story that started being told for us, 17 years ago. We had contracted to buy the Babcock Florida company in 2005 and had a year to close. And so from 2005 to 2006, we set out to take what was contracted at agricultural value with underlying agricultural zoning and get it re-entitled for 19,500 homes and 6 million square feet of commercial space. And so that's what we set out to do, 17 plus years ago. And we had contracted to buy Babcock Florida company, which owned the Babcock Ranch, which was 91,000 acres. And we had went on a sprint to get our entitlements done in a year and also turn around and sell the vast majority of the ranch to the state of Florida for permanent preservation. We had known that the state had been pursuing the Babcock Ranch property to connect the natural wildlife corridor from Lake Okeechobee to the Charlotte Harbor Basin, and they were unable to get that deal done. We stepped in to the deal to buy the entire ranch with the expectation we could turn around and help the state accomplish their objectives, which was to sell a big portion of the property, 80% of the property, 73,000 acres of the 91,000 acres back to the state of Florida for permanent preservation. And we would keep 18,000 acres for the 19,500 homes and 6 million square feet of commercial to build the town of Babcock Ranch. And that's what we did. We did that from 2005 to 2006. We closed on Babcock in 2006. We closed on the sale of the state simultaneously, and the state got its 73,000 acre nature preserve that surrounds Babcock Ranch today. And we got 18,000 acres of that land for building the town of Babcock Ranch with 19,500 homes and 6 million square feet of commercial. So with that, when you're undertaking something of that size and scale, which is not something, many of us get a chance to do in our careers, it's a very, it's a seminal moment where you step back and you really try to absorb, what you're doing and the impact it could have on the surrounding region. And, try to surround yourself with very forward thinking, thoughtful people to help look around corners, think about the future of how people are going to live, and and plan the community accordingly. And so we started that process, like I said, a long time ago, 17 years ago, with an appreciation for the first move we made, which I just described, which was selling 80% of the ranch into preservation. And right there, if you just look at the ranch at that moment, you get 18,000 acre town that hasn't started construction yet, that's surrounded by 73,000 acres of nature. And right across the street from Babcock Ranch on the west side, State Road 31 borders the west side of the property. On the west side of State Road 31, there's another 60,000 acres of land that's called the Babcock Cecil Webb Preserve that the Babcock family dedicated to the state in the 50s. We're just surrounded by nature. And so there's an obligation that comes with that as to how do we be a good neighbor, to the environment, and how do we take that to heart. And as we're master planning and thinking about this new town we're developing, let's start right there. Let's just start with the fact that we are embedded in nature and we have a higher level of responsibility to make sure we're planning and designing a community, a town that can cohabitate with the nature around us. And so there's a very strong, visible, physical real estate, perspective going in the door that Babcock Ranch was going to be a different place, and the nature and the environmental aspects of it were kind of staring us in the face, and got really excited about what we could do with that if Babcock embraced the environmental aspects of the community, embraced the environmental community itself, and brought them in to help us plan and design Babcock Ranch, which is what we did. A bit contrarian, but we brought in the Audubon Society, we brought in Florida Fish and Wildlife, we brought in the World Wildlife Fund. We brought them into the room with us when we were buying Babcock and asked for their help in looking at the land and drawing the lines as to where we would develop and what areas we would stay out of that were environmentally sensitive, to help us figure out how to make this an environmentally sensitive project. And it was an incredible exercise, the result of which was, I think we had a lot of buy-in from the environmental community, as they felt they had a voice and they had a seat at the table to help us really, architecturally, environmentally, master plan wise, really kind of draw those lines as to where we would develop and where we would stay out of and preserve. And so it was a really interesting exercise.
And did they become your allies then in getting your entitlements, and have they continued to be allies as you move the development forward since you acquired the property?
They really did. It was really something to be part of. And again, a bit contrarian for developers to be working hand in glove with the environmental community, but they did become advocates. They got up on stage with us. They stood behind us. We used their logos to help support the deal. And it also heightens the sensitivity that we've got towards this issue, and making sure we're walking the walk and not just talking the talk. At Babcock Ranch, we take that advocacy very seriously and don't want to let those folks down, given all the time and effort and trust they've put into us. And so beyond the sale to the state, when you look at the 18,000 acres that we actually ended up buying, within that 18,000 acre footprint, this environmental community came in and helped us further master plan that 18,000 acres. And such that of the 18,000 acres we bought, 9,000 of those acres, half of those acres, are in permanent preservation. So when you back up, we sold 73,000 to the state for permanent preservation. Of the 18,000 acres we kept, 9,000 of those acres are in permanent preservation. So, you do the math, and 82,000 acres of the 91,000 are preserved lands. And so over 90% of what we bought is in permanent preservation. We're very proud of that. And that's part of the hallmark of Babcock Ranch. And if you're out there, if you've ever been there, Carter, it's hard to miss. It's just that's the nature of where we are, and that's the essence of Babcock Ranch. So that was the spark that said, okay, this is different. We're gonna have a town of 50,000 people living here at some point in time in the future. What do we need to do to be good stewards of the land and to be responsible master developers that are looking towards healthcare, health and wellness, renewable energy, education, transportation, and the like, and safety and storm resiliency. We really need to think about this as a town building exercise, not a master plan community.
Mhm.
And so, it required a lot of strategy. It required a lot of, collaboration with folks outside of Kitson and Partners, Florida Power and Light being one of those big collaborators in the renewable energy space, and thinking about how solar could play a role at Babcock Ranch, which was really the second big pillar we tackled after the environmental tackle. Was okay, let's get renewable energy at Babcock Ranch and let's do it with solar. We're in the Sunshine State. It's a viable alternative energy source here, but let's engage with one of the strongest companies in the state that is focused on renewable energy, which is Florida Power and Light. And let's roll up our sleeves and figure out how do we bring solar to Babcock Ranch, and utility scale solar, not just rooftop solar, but utility scale solar. And that agreement was reached with Florida Power and Light in 2009. And the wrinkle in that, as a regulated utility, to build a new utility, they're required to build it at the least cost option.
Mhm.
And so at the time, while they were in agreement this would happen at Babcock, the challenge we had from a timing perspective was that solar was more expensive than natural gas. Natural gas had been the lowest cost option for new utilities for a long time. And so it took about 6 years for solar to further innovate and iterate as a business, such that the cost of solar was able to come back down in eclipse and kind of have that inflection point hit where it became at par from a cost perspective with natural gas. So in 2015, Florida Power and Light came in and broke ground on the first phase of our solar array on 440 acres of land to build 75 megawatts of solar photovoltaic energy for Babcock Ranch. And that's another, you look at the pillars for Babcock. So the environmental pillar, then you got the renewable energy pillar. This was a really big event for us. It's a very big hallmark for the community that when the sun is out, we are powered by the sun. And that was at the time, pretty cutting edge. At the time, they also put in a solar to battery storage system, which at the time was the first of its kind. I think it's evolved since in the industry, but fairly cutting edge at the time, that would help give us another 4 hours of potential redistribution of solar energy when the sun wasn't out. So, obviously not where we need to be to get off the grid and be a microgrid, but certainly a step in the right direction towards learning and innovating on battery storage, which is really the holy grail for the solar industry, as to how do we get battery storage at a place where we can truly store and redistribute energy for 12 plus, 15 plus hours to avoid, nighttime when the sun goes down and having to back into the grid. But we're not there yet as an industry. I think, there are a lot of folks out there that are pushing that technology to get there. But the success of the first phase of that solar led to a second phase of the solar that Florida Power and Light went forward with as well on another 400 acres. So over 840 acres of land for a second 75 megawatt solar PV at Babcock, and 150 megawatts in total on 840 acres, probably a total of about 737,000 panels of solar at Babcock, all of which we can use to power the town and still create net. We're a creator of energy that flows back into the grid. So even at build out of Babcock, when it's got 50,000 people living there, we will still not consume as much energy as we generate on site.
Wow, that's incredible. And to my knowledge, this is the first master plan or community, if you will, that I've seen that has this large of solar array, and it may be the only one. Are you familiar with others that are out there, Tom?
I think others have followed, or at least tried to follow. I'm not fully up to speed on who has and what the sizes are. This was the first of its kind when it happened with Florida Power and Light in 2015. And then Florida Power and Light, again, they were waiting for this solar cost to come down so they could actually do a lot more solar in general. Babcock was the first one they've done. They've done a bunch since. And I think some other communities have tried to mirror this, but I don't think anyone's done it at the size and scale we've done it.
Yeah, no, I was just amazed. And to our listeners, if you want to go on Babcock Ranch's website, you can take a look at the solar array. It's absolutely impressive. And the other thing that, I was really shocked by, given here again, I don't live in Florida, but after the hurricane, I to me, it didn't look like any of the solar panels were damaged by the wind or the hurricane. I mean, how does that happen? It looks like they could just easily blow away, but none of it was damaged. Is that correct?
That's correct. Not one panel was dislodged or damaged. Same with Hurricane Irma that came through in 2017, and we didn't lose one panel there during that storm either, which was a pretty severe storm that came over the top of Babcock Ranch as well. Yeah, and it's an engineering exercise. I think Florida Power and Light is one of the best in the business on renewable energy, and they're low to the ground, and if properly engineered, not unlike how you have code to build homes that can withstand hurricane force winds, you can do the same with solar panels if you're properly engineered.
So just to kind of recap, you've got 18,000 acres of master plan surrounded by 73,000 acres of preserve. You took 9,000 of your 18,000 and said, this is going to be permanent open space for the community. We've got an 800 plus acre solar array that powers not only the community, but also can be a net positive back into the grid. Now, I also understand you've done other things related to green building, energy savings on the structures, water conservation. Do you care to get into some of those other aspects of sustainability that you built in? And then
Sure.
the other thing that I also found interesting was your technology and the use of autonomous vehicles, et cetera. So, well, I'll just let you go from there, Tom.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to get through. So,
yeah.
The sustainability means a lot of things to a lot of different folks. And I think, big picture for us, how do we develop a town that minimizes its impact on the environment, that is a town that folks can live in, work in, and recreate in without having to travel all over Southwest Florida. So how do we bring all those services and all those daily needs into Babcock Ranch to have it be self-contained? And how do we leverage all the natural resources that we have around us and leave them in a net better place than they were when we got there? And so there's a lot there, and there's a lot of ways to do different things. I think one of the things that we're advantaged by, and you referenced it earlier in introduction, Carter, is we are about 25 miles inland.
Mm-hmm.
And so just part of this impact of these hurricanes that come through, a lot of it is wind and a lot of it is flood. And I think Florida has done a tremendous job since Hurricane Andrew came through in 1992 to focus on building codes, particularly in South Florida, to help make structures more sustainable and resilient to hurricanes. And so, I think in general, building structures that have been built post Andrew in 92 in Florida are pretty well built, and it's gotten more stringent on the building code since 92. They recess it every several years, and they've raised the bar on construction standards, which may be cumbersome as a developer / builder going through it. But when times like Ian happen, or Irma or Katrina or Charlie, whatever it might be, you really appreciate the level of discipline that Florida's brought forth in the building code. So I think one is building code. Are the buildings built to withstand, hurricane force winds? I think the state of Florida in general and South Florida does a great job of that. Second question is, where are you building? Where are you located? And that's more about the surge and how do you mitigate the risk of storm surge and flooding. And so, we are, as I said, 25 miles inland, so we're outside of the storm surge, and we happen just topography, geology, we happen to sit about 30 feet above sea level, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Florida geography, but that's a virtual mountain in Florida. We don't, it's a fairly flat state. So we're inland and we're upland. And so we're outside the storm surge. So when you juxtapose, the visuals of what you might see at Babcock Ranch versus what you might see, at Fort Myers Beach or in Sanibel Island or in Captiva, which is heartbreaking. It's apples and oranges. They are on the coast inside the storm surge. And that damage that you saw is largely caused by flooding, more so than wind. Certainly, there were older vintage buildings that were in those locations that were built pre-Andrew that were obviously susceptible to the wind risk. But the majority of buildings that had been built since Andrew, post 92, could withstand that wind. What they couldn't withstand was the storm surge and the flooding. And when the storm surge hits 18 feet, which is unprecedented in the history of the state, there's a lot of unintended, consequences that come from it. So, Babcock, beneficiary of being inland, beneficiary of being upland with 30 feet. And then from there, what do we do to help further mitigate against risk? And one of the things we did is we looked at the historical maps of the property, looking back 100 years and looking at the natural flowways in the property. Water is a bit, it'll speak to you if you watch it and listen to it. It shows you where it wants to go based upon the natural, topo of the land. And we really studied it with the engineers and the environmental community to figure that out. And what we try to do is, instead of building in those areas, we bolstered those areas with environmental investment and creating, recreating habitat by building a weir system with littoral shelves and plantings to help further enhance our filter marshes that would help us, help us from a drainage perspective when there were massive amounts of rain or flooding that would occur in our region. We wanted to be prepared for it. And this was a big test. This was a big test of that as well. When you look out, okay, we're protected from the storm surge. Okay, check. We've got our building codes in check with respect to code. And on top of that, we go beyond that with the Florida Green Build Coalition codes. So we're above and beyond standard code. Check. How's your drainage? How is the community going to flood? And what have we done to help mitigate that? So we've spent a lot of time and effort over the years with our engineers to get the natural aspects of Babcock from from a flowway, greenway, blueway perspective, filter marsh perspective, master drainage perspective. The property drains north to south. It runs to the south. So how do we enhance those wetland areas with incremental investment of our capital to make it to further mitigate against drainage or flooding issues? And that's what we've done over the years. And that's worked spectacularly well. We've seen the habitat recreate itself over the years pre any sort of storm, and seen how these weir systems we've put in have been able to recreate habitat by capturing more water in the natural filter marshes that exist, and seen all the habitat that's come out of that. What we hadn't really seen and been tested yet on was a major storm like this, and with the property to be able to drain properly. And it did. It passed that test very, very strongly. And over the years, we've been testing that ourselves, just from a runoff perspective. Are these filter marshes that we've set up, are they working? And what we've got the data that shows it, that the water that hits our property is actually cleaner when it runs off the property than it was when it landed on the property.
Wow, that's amazing.
When it makes its way through this natural filter marsh. Yeah, it's pretty exciting. It's pretty cool.
Well, and the proof is in the pudding. And how has the home buying public community reacted to all of the efforts that you've been making in terms of sustainability? And it's somewhat of a loaded question, because I know you're a number 9 on the top selling master plan communities in the nation, but maybe you want to add a little bit more color to that, Tom.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, because that gets back to your comment about the proofs in the pudding. I'll round it out. A couple more things. I think education is a big part of that sustainability story for us as well. And so we've got, pre-K, daycare, we've got K to 8, and we just opened up our high school this past August. So we've got the lower school education program in place, which I think people, they may not put that in a sustainability bucket, but when you're thinking about how do we cater to the masses of home buyers and not just become a one-trick pony for one part of the demographic, how do we create a really multi-generational town? Education is critical in that sustainability story from our perspective. So that's been a big part of our story. And we led with that in our first phase, which is a bit contrarian. We had no homes. We hadn't sold any homes yet we're opening up a temporary school. And so it's been a bit of a hallmark of our community since day one. And it's probably been one of our most valuable assets, is the school system we've created at Babcock. It's a public charter school, project-based learning school, K to 12, and thriving. And really, it gets to your question about how's the market responded. That school system has really brought an entirely new demographic to Babcock, which is the families that have children and that are looking for a high quality school to send their children to. That absent that school from our strategy, we would not have nearly as many of those folks showing up at Babcock Ranch to live, because the schools are not located in a convenient location vis-a-vis Babcock off property. So having it on property, having it be a project-based learning school, state-of-the-art school, has been a huge impact on our buying group. Health and wellness has also been a huge part of that sustainability story for us. We've got over 50 miles of hiking trails and biking trails. We've got extra wide sidewalks to promote and enhance more walking and biking. And we've also got, wider bike lanes that are a little safer for folks to get out on the road. So, and all these things you do in the planning stages and the design stages, not really knowing how the community is going to respond or how the market's going to respond. And what we've seen is, if you walk through Babcock Ranch, on any given weekday or weekend, you'll just see tons of people out and about on bikes, pushing strollers, walking all throughout Babcock Ranch. So that health and wellness, mindset is alive and well in Babcock. If you go to a school and you look at the bikes that are at the school, and the bike, it's basically like a bike cage where there's hundreds of bikes. And when these kids get out of school, they're on those bikes, they're driving to the lakes to go fishing with their fishing rods. They're going out to the splash park. They're going out to the pickleball courts. They're all over the place. So I think that health and wellness is a big part of that sustainable story. We've got Lee Health Memorial, which is the largest healthcare provider in Southwest Florida, that's in there and operating our 27,000 square foot health and wellness center. And if I stop there for a minute, the mindset I mentioned earlier is collaborative, and we've taken a very partner-minded approach. We cannot be all things to all people as a developer. So how do we surround ourselves with like-minded groups that share the vision of Babcock Ranch of sustainability? So Florida Power and Light, clearly, a partner to us in the renewable energy. I mentioned earlier, sitting down with the Audubon Society, sitting down with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Group, World Wildlife Fund, Sierra Club. The environmental community has been a partner to us on the environmental side. Lee Health Memorial on the health and wellness side. We have CenturyLink there for fiber on the technology side to bring fiber to every home and business. And on the transportation side, we had a partnership with Transdev, which at the time was the world's largest transportation company out of France, to help us launch an autonomous vehicle platform at Babcock Ranch, which happened as a pilot program between January of 18 and summer of 19. It was an 18-month pilot program, and that was done in partnership with Transdev. And so I say that just because, I think we're the architect, if you will, of the vision and the goals and objectives of the sustainable town of Babcock Ranch. But we really need to, wrap arms with a lot of, industry titans here to come in and help us execute on that vision, because we can't do all things. We're not experts in all those arenas. We have a great vision, but it requires expertise in specific disciplines to help bring it to life. And so we've done our part on the master planning side, on the execution side, on the vision side, and staying true and disciplined to the vision. But we've also had the benefit of bringing really great, like-minded partners across that spectrum to help bring it to life.
Yeah. Takes a village to build the village, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, wouldn't be a complete interview if I didn't ask you a little bit about your financing. Now, I believe that Babcock has a community development district on it. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in the master plan community business here in Florida, it's fairly standard for the last 30 plus years to have community development districts, CDDs, which are essentially, municipal bonds to fund utilities, infrastructure, water, sewer, et cetera. And so we've been in that space for our entire careers. What we did at Babcock Ranch, given the size and scale of Babcock Ranch and the fact that we're building a new town, is we actually went through the legislative process to form an independent special district, which is a much more amplified version of a CDD, which gives us broader reaching governance and control over the town. And so all of our financing that we do, it operates like a typical CDD financing would, but it runs through our independent special district. So the only debt we have at Babcock Ranch is long-term 30-year bonds to fund those infrastructure needs that we have at Babcock Ranch. We have no conventional mortgage debt on Babcock, nor any sort of A2s or B bonds that other groups issue, other developer groups issue on some of their projects. We've taken a fairly low leveraged approach, a conservative approach to financing, and that's the only sort of form of debt we've got on Babcock.
Yeah, and just for kind of ballpark figures, what does that equate to on a per lot basis? Just curious. And then
on average, if I paint with a broad brush, Carter, it'll probably blend to about between $1,200 and $1,500 per home.
Yeah.
In a non-ad valorem assessment. basis. And that's really what we look at. I mean, we
Very
look
reasonable.
and certainly we want to stay within market and stay, if we can, below market. So there's no quote unquote extra cost, if you will, or extra cost burden to live at Babcock Ranch versus our peer group in the marketplace.
Yep, absolutely. And then were you able to use the ISD to help finance some of the sustainable infrastructure you're talking about, the weir systems, drainage, open space, parks, or was it primarily streets, roads, water, sewer?
Yeah, it's primarily the latter. There's fairly strict guidelines on what's eligible and what's not eligible for CDs and for bonds. And so we have to be very obviously conversant and understanding of those parameters, which we are. And so, and obviously mostly if it's for public good, it's for public use, it tends to be, again, I'm painting with a broad brush, but it'll tend to be CD eligible. If it gets more private use, or kind of, more privately used assets, it's more difficult to use bond dollars to fund those types of items. So we've got so much, and for us, we've got so many more costs than we have bonds.
Yeah.
That it's really about, where do we put those bond dollars to offset those costs? We're certainly, if it costs us $100 to put something in, the bonds probably equate to $35, right? So it's we've got 35% of our costs can get covered by these A bonds. We've still got 65% of our costs that we're coming out of pocket with our equity to fund.
Yep, makes sense. Tom, we're coming close to our time limit. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience related to sustainability or Babcock Ranch that you may not have gotten a chance to speak about?
It's a great question to maybe wrap it up with. When we set out on this path 17 years ago, part of it was to prove to ourselves and hopefully others that you can actually do sustainable development without breaking the bank, and you can do it from an economic perspective and still have it make sense. And I think we've proven that out. I think the lesson for us, and I think even for the industry, if you really spend the time on the front end planning and designing, on a sustainable basis, it costs a heck of a lot less than if you're trying to come in and do it after the fact. And so, I think if you take that approach and you're disciplined in that approach, you get the right, folks in the room with you from an engineering perspective and from a design perspective and a master planning perspective, you can really do some things that don't break your bank or break your budget, but certainly, pay huge dividends down the road once you execute on it. I think that's a big piece of this puzzle. The one thing I failed to mention, which is really critical to the sustainability story at Babcock Ranch, is our utility. Town and country utility, which is our water utility, water and wastewater. And that's a big part of that sustainable story. Babcock Ranch just geologically sits on top of basically a bathtub of water in the aquifer system. And so we are able to, we have a fully certified utility called Town and Country that we are able to go into the aquifer system to get our water and distribute potable water and irrigation water, and all of our reclaimed water runs through that utility. And again, that's all part of that natural system of just tapping into the resources below surface at Babcock, bringing it into our plant, treating it, and getting it back out for use. And as the ebbs and flows of water come in and out of Babcock Ranch and out of Florida, that bathtub naturally regenerates, and we have this sustainable source of water. So, Carter, we were having that conversation out in Dallas at ULI about water, and we just sit in such a unique spot that's truly, that's one of the most sustainable stories at Babcock is our water. We're not going off site. We're not going to the Charlotte County, Lee County Public Works to get our water. We're going subsurface at Babcock into the aquifer system and bringing it into our utility to treat it and redistribute it.
And then after you treat it, are you recharging the aquifer, or are you letting it flow through the wetlands and your drainage?
It recharges naturally through just the natural, 365-day a year type climate and precipitation that runs through Florida and through Babcock.
Wow, that's amazing. Especially coming from the Southwest. We're jealous.
Yeah, it's pretty special.
Yeah. No, that's great. We'll obviously get that in. Anything else, Tom? Closing comments?
Our closing comments, we've got our hearts are breaking for our neighbors in Southwest Florida. We're spending a lot of time on relief to help our folks, our friends, our colleagues, our associates who are being affected by the tragedies of Hurricane Ian. And there's a lot that can be done. I think there's a lot we should be thinking about as it relates to how we rebuild Southwest Florida. What are the lessons learned out there across the country, across the world that can be brought forth in Lee County and Charlotte County for best practices as to how to put our best foot forward. These storms are not going to stop coming. And I think the obligation we've got as developers is to develop responsibly and embrace, change, embrace innovation to avoid some of these tragic outcomes we're dealing with here today.
Absolutely, Tom. And you guys really have taken a leadership role in showing the development community what is possible. And I truly believe that you're the industry leader in this aspect. And congratulations on everything you've done. And let's help Florida build back better. Absolutely.
Well said, Carter. Thank you for having me today. It's been a lot of fun, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.
You have been listening to the Land to Lots podcast with Carter Froelich. Tune in next week for the next episode.